Woodblock printmaker David Bull back in our Hokusai shop with the next in our series of videos discussing the creation of our reproduction of Hokusai's masterful Great Wave design. So far in this series I have spent time in two different worlds. I have brought you discussion and video of the actual process of printmaking, and at other times I've covered material of a more general nature, discussing differences between various editions, things like that. Today's video is going to concentrate on the research side. I'm still busy, of course, with the carving, and the next video will be pretty much nothing but more close-up views of the work there. But for today, we're going to get the magnifying glass out and take a very close look at two versions of the original print, ones that I'm using to guide my own carving work. One in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and one in the British Museum in London. Over the past couple of months, I've discovered some very interesting things about these two sheets of paper, and today I'd like to share some of these with you. Before we start, I can mention I've prepared a web page to supplement this video with images showing close-ups of all the things I'm going to discuss, and you can find the URL for that in the description of this video on its YouTube page. So, for those of you who haven't bailed out already to wait for that carving video, let's dig in. This is the British Museum copy. Their website tells us they acquired it in 2008 from a family who had had it in their possession for apparently a great many years. This is the Metropolitan copy acquired by them in 1929 and also apparently a very old piece of paper. According to the information on their websites, both of these institutions seem to be considering their copy as an original, in the sense of being issued by the original publisher back in the original time period. Now, if these are both original, then it was a matter of course both be printed from the same block set. Now, they actually look quite a bit different, but many of these differences, this gray color in the sky, the different blue on the waves, the different color of the boats, are really not important. A different printing session, a different printer perhaps, more or less attention from the publisher, perhaps a reissue some years later with the blocks being brought out of storage. Any of those things could easily account for the color differences that we see here. It's the actual blocks, the carved lines that I want to think about. Are they the same? Are there clues we can look for in these two images that will allow an experienced printmaker to make a decision on such a thing? There are indeed. Presented with these two images and asked that question, is this the same block set? I would look back and forth for a few minutes and then perhaps say, look at this. Here in the Met copy, in the middle of that white piece of foam, there's a leftover piece of wood that the carver failed to clear away. It's clearly not part of the actual design intention. It's a small error that just got overlooked in the production process. Over on the BM copy, well, look at that, we find exactly the same thing. The shape is a tiny bit different, but that's easily explained by a bit of wear over time. It looks like these could indeed be the same blocks. Continuing to look around, we discover on the Met copy, in one of the foam blobs, it's been properly carved on the dark blue block, but has been neglected to be carved from a lighter blue block underneath it. The spots have to be cut from both blocks and lined up to allow the white paper to show through to make a piece of foam. It's another small carver's error. Over on the British Museum copy, look at this, exactly the same mistake in exactly the same place. It really is looking like these could be the same blocks. Here's a big one. Look up here at the box that borders the calligraphy on the print. This is the Met copy. Look how the lines waver from thin to thick. The carver must have cut these lines freehand without any kind of ruler guide, as was sometimes used. Comparing the British Museum copy, we find, exactly the same pattern of waviness. This is beginning to look like an open and shut case. There is no way that such waviness would randomly match if these were different blocks. So if I'd been asked to give an opinion at this point, I would have said it looks like the Metropolitan Museum and the British Museum can congratulate themselves on having a matching pair of prints from perhaps the original block set. But that's not the end of the story. When we look closer, much closer, we begin to notice anomalies. Still up in the calligraphy corner, ignore the box for a moment and look at the characters themselves. These shots I prepared show the Met copy on the left and the British Museum copy on the right. I've stuck some arrows in there to highlight some places where there's a dramatic difference in the characters. None of these differences can be attributed to a bit of tamari paste on the blocks, or poor printer work, a bit more pressure, a bit less pressure. We are looking at two different carvers' interpretations of the calligraphy. There is no way that these two prints could have been pulled from the same blocks. Is it just the calligraphy that shows a difference? If so, then we might perhaps assume that after a period of wear, a plug was put into the original block in this corner, and that just that portion was recarved. No, it's everywhere. There is no wear on this block that doesn't show such differences if you look closely enough. Here's another example. On one of the boats, all the strokes delineating that straw cover are different. And up here in the wave itself, there are so many differences, none of which can be attributed to a different printing touch. These prints were made from different block sets. There's just no doubt about it. So where does that leave us? I know there were different blocks. So what? As we all know, Hokusai's Great Wave has been reproduced literally hundreds of times in the 180 years ago since it was first produced. Finding two prints made from different blocks is no big deal. In an earlier video, where's my copies here? In an earlier video, I've shown you some more modern versions that are clearly made from different block sets. But this Metropolitan and British Museum pair is different from those in one important respect. The carver who cut the modern version made no attempt to reproduce that waviness in the calligraphy box. He didn't leave that missing blob of foam. There would be no reason for him to do those things. But for some reason, the carver of one of these prints was given instructions to reproduce the other one as absolutely closely as he could, right down to all the imperfections. One of these prints is a knockoff, made with the clear intention of being a forgery of the other. It's not hard to understand why. Quite early in its life, this design became famous. Certainly by the time the foreigners were flooding into Japan in the late Edo period, the Great Wave had become a desirable object. Copies of which, original copies of which, commanded good prices. Somewhere along the way, an enterprising publisher had his team create a number of Great Wave prints that, to all intents and purposes, and remember, no high-resolution scans were available, were indistinguishable from the ones generally recognized as the originals. He perhaps had them distress the paper a bit to make it match older copies. And remember, this was all happening quite close to the original date of publication. From our point of view now, 150 years past that date, paper differences have become irrelevant. That publisher perhaps made good money on it. Of course, I have no idea. And now some of those reproductions, or forgeries, or knockoffs, whatever you want to call them, have pride of place in many museums around the world. Now, a few weeks back, once I got to this point in the investigation, people around me here began to ask me an obvious question. Dave, can you tell which of these two, the Metropolitan copy or the British Museum copy, is the original and which is the knockoff? Well, I certainly can't testify that either of them is an original. Both of them might be Edo or Meiji period knockoffs, for all we can tell. There might be another one above this that they were both copied from. Honestly speaking, I myself find these both a bit suspiciously clean. So I can't guarantee one is an original, but I can tell you, I think, which one of these came first and which was copied from it. But this video is getting kind of long, so let's save that for the next episode. Thank you again for following along with this ever-expanding story. The next video will be shot mostly back at the carving bench for sure. That work, here's the block again, is coming along very, very well. In fact, I'm getting close to finishing the key block now. But I've got to keep things moving forward steadily or the Kickstarter backers are going to be after my head. So let's just take our traditional little walk this evening to close this off, and I'll see you next time. Thank you again for all your interest and all your wonderful comments on these videos. Good night for now. Here's my street, the well-known Odokudori. Perhaps you can see my sign right in the middle there. And today we're going to do something a bit different. We're going to visit a few of my neighbors. The first shop in the row here is Tenkoku, a very small cafe, and it's a very well-known place. They had an appearance in a famous comic book a while back. And now people line up at lunchtime to buy one of their famous samurai helmet hot dogs. These are our immediate neighbors, the shoe store. The three ladies that work there have been really, really friendly to us. So they've given us all kinds of advice on how we can integrate well into this community. And it's nice also to help them with some English customers who drop by now and then. We're now going to switch to night mode for the rest of this. The shoe store is closed there. Starting from my building, working next, there's a bar called Bar Emmy. And this is a karaoke bar where they sing mostly enka, and we can hear crooners beating it out until well late into the night. Next to them is a very unusual little place. It's a smoke shop. And I don't mean they sell cigarettes. What they are is it's a hookah bar. Keep calm and smoke shisha. Not my kind of place, but anyway, interesting. Back at my shop now, moving in the other direction, my immediate neighbor is an Italian restaurant. Unfortunately, he's closed tonight, but sometimes he's quite lively. Lots of people on the patio there enjoying pizza and real Japanese food. Next to him is the Orange Room Jazz Bar. Live jazz, maybe half a dozen times a month, and especially great on rainy nights. You can hear the saxophone wailing over the empty streets. Next to him is the Asakusa Little Theatre, who claim to be the smallest theatre on this planet. I think I've got a good bunch of neighbors here. It's great fun being in the middle of all these interesting places.